Before I begin to tell you how the sand house was made, I'd like to start by just showing you a few photographs. In this one we can see a man standing in a large tunnel that has been very carefully dug through the ground. We can even see daylight coming in from one side. And we know the tunnel must be about 4 meters high, just from the size of the man that's standing there. Here we see a carving of a king up in the roof of the tunnel. We can see the crown on the king's head. Now you might think that such an unusual feature would be in some faraway place, perhaps in the Middle East or in India or somewhere like that. But no, these were under the streets of Doncaster for more than 100 years. Here is another carving. This one is of a cherub, a young angel. You can see his wings and also his robes that are draped beneath his shoulders and outstretched arms. And this is the most memorable carving that was down there in the tunnels. It's of an elephant and mahout. Now mahout is an Indian word for an elephant keeper. See how the carving has been cleverly incorporated into a column supporting the roof of the tunnel. But as if these tunnels and carvings were not enough, there was an actual house carved out of solid rock. And here we can see that house in this photograph from over 100 years ago. Sometimes it was referred to as Don Castle, sometimes as the Rock House, but usually it was known and is known as the Sand House. You'll see that it has quite a normal looking roof, but all the walls, they were solid rock. So let us look at how the sand house was made. Way back in 1832, a man named William Senior bought a piece of land on the southern edge of Doncaster, and on that land he began to dig out a small sandstone quarry. So now, with the help of a few drawings, and also pictures of a sand model being dug out, I'd like to show you how the house developed. This drawing shows William Senior's land around the 1840s, with the sand pit or the small quarry about halfway along it. And now we cut to the sand model and see that same sand pit in the middle. The quarry was dug deeper as more sandstone rock was excavated, and then deeper still. But then, as they made the quarry larger, they left a large block of sandstone in place, big enough to make a 2-story house out of it. The massive block of sandstone was hollowed out to form 2 rooms upstairs and 2 downstairs. Then a roof was added, and by 1857 William Senior's son Henry had moved in. The sand pit or quarry grew bigger as more and more sandstone was dug out, until it eventually reached all the way to Greendyke Lane. This is a drawing that shows what the sand house would have looked like by the late 1850s. When more land became available to buy, at the other side of Burden Lane on the left of this photograph, Henry Senior bought it. He built a new street called Victoria Street, and that allowed him to dig out Burden Lane, so more sandstone was dug from the ground. Then, in exactly the same way that the original part of the sand house had been created, so more ground was dug out, a much larger block of sandstone was exposed, more rooms were hollowed out, and a massive house, 36 meters long and 2 stories high, was created. More sandstone was removed towards Greendyke Lane until as much as possible had been dug out, and then the quarry floor was turned into a marvellous sunken garden. This photograph shows the completed sand house with its garden laid out in front of it. And now let me show you that whole process once again with the help of a time-lapse video and a larger sand model. So we're going to start with an old map of the area and then gradually merge into the sand model. On this map you might see the sand pit. There it is, just about in the middle of the screen now. And we see the sand pit, or the small quarry, gradually being dug out and getting deeper and deeper. And there's a little access road leading down into it. Now we're going to turn and look from the opposite direction, from Greendyke Lane. Here we see that small original sandhouse being created and the quarry being enlarged before the adjacent streets were laid out. Then Burden Lane was removed, more sandstone was dug out, and that much bigger house emerged out of the ground. The sandhouse even had its own ballroom upstairs. Then we see the rest of the quarry being dug out, and then terraced houses being built on the adjacent streets. Finally, the quarry floor was laid out as an impressive sunken garden in front of the sandhouse. Despite the very unusual way in which the sandhouse was made, inside it looked like many other Victorian homes. This main sitting room was called the Long Room. On this photograph we see the fireplace that was in the Long Room. Because the walls of the house were so thick, they were typically about 1 metre thick, it was possible to cut recessed seats into those internal walls, such as the ones that we can see either side of this fireplace. Outside, however, the sandhouse was very different from any normal house because of those solid sandstone walls. There were even carvings made directly into the rock on those outside walls. Those tunnels that we saw on the very early photographs were dug through the ground that surrounded the quarry. One of the tunnels was called the Cloisters, and it ran directly underneath Victoria Street. Looking at that sand model from above, we can see an arrow pointing towards where the Cloisters Tunnel used to run, behind the rock face of the quarry. Windows were cut into that rock face to allow daylight to enter the Cloisters Tunnel. So now we're going to take a short virtual walk along the Cloisters Tunnel, looking at more of the carvings that were down there. This impressive sculpture is of Pat, the Irishman. He stood 3.5 metres tall next to one of those windows. On the right hand side of the window was Pat's partner, named Biddy. She was only about 3 metres tall. In the background shadows of this photograph, you might just make out the head of the Cherub who we saw earlier, and on the right is the head and shoulders of a clown wearing a pointed hat. Looking back from the far end of the cloisters, we can see the carving of the king up at the top of the photograph, and if you look very closely in the distance, you might just make out the trunk of the elephant. Here is the elephant once again with his mahout. This drawing shows the layout of the Cloisters Tunnel viewed from above, with the positions of the main carvings marked on it. Back in 2012, a very talented artist named Jamie Wardley made a full-size replica of the elephant and mahout out of sand. In fact, he used almost 40 tons of sand. I'm sorry to say that the sandhouse no longer exists. The house itself was destroyed around 1938, and the quarry that it stood in was filled up once again to ground level. The tunnels, they were filled in progressively, mainly through the 1970s and 1980s. On this aerial photograph of Doncaster, there's a red pin in the lower centre which marks where the sandhouse used to stand. Other notable places around the town are also marked on here. It is difficult to believe that the view that once looked like this now looks like this. Thankfully, the Sandhouse is not being forgotten. It is being given a legacy by the work of the Sandhouse charity through educational activities and projects, such as making this video. Thank you for watching.